At LSI, we don't just follow trends, we help shape the future. Welcome to Behind the Win, the podcast where we break down the biggest moves in tech, innovation, leadership, and government contracting. Here at LSI, we're bringing you exclusive conversations with the minds behind groundbreaking advancements, disruptive strategies, and industry-defining wins. From retail to tech, defense to government solutions. This is where you get the insights to stay ahead. Let's go behind the win.
Welcome back to Behind the Win, the podcast where we explore the leaders, ideas, and experiences behind strong organizations and communities. Today I'm joined by Ken Pimlott, former Director and Chief of CAL FIRE. Ken spent more than 3 decades in the fire service, ultimately leading CAL FIRE through some of the most challenging and destructive wildfires in California's history. This conversation is especially meaningful to us at LSI because of our work supporting CAL FIRE's aviation and logistics mission. We see firsthand how much preparation, coordination, and leadership happens behind the scenes to make sure people and resources are ready when they're needed most. Today, Ken and I are talking about leadership under pressure, the future of wildfire resilience, and the lessons he's taken from a career dedicated to public service.
Ken, thanks for joining us today. We're excited to have you.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm excited to be here, Sarah.
So let's jump right in. But you went from seasonal firefighter to, eventually leading CAL FIRE. How did your understanding of leadership change as your responsibility grew back then?
Yeah, first of all, when I started out in my career, that being the chief of CAL FIRE was the last thing on my mind. You just don't think about that. I was enjoying being a firefighter. I was a forester as well, a resource professional. And, really just focusing on the job at hand and, trying to do a good job out in the field and working on projects. And it really wasn't until, years later when I started really looking back at where I'd come that I realized that I was sort of leading in different projects and programs along the way and just didn't realize it. And you sort of, leadership isn't, there's lots of books. There are lots of things that help guide you through, and there are lots of workshops and seminars. Those are all, helpful and great. But at the end of the day, leadership is something that's really coming from within you, and it's something that you learn. And I think over time, I just developed my own style by watching lots of other people. I had lots of mentors. I would just, in those early days, just watch how other people were doing things. And whether it was consciously or subconsciously, I was learning sort of things that worked for me and things that, maybe weren't my style.
Well, I think that's good too, because sometimes when folks come in, whether that's a new company or just the new next level up of leadership, is someone told me right for the first 60 days, just like you said, listen, watch, and don't make any crazy huge decisions. But I love that you say just kind of listen and sit back and observe, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you led through some incredibly difficult emergencies. What is it really like making decisions when conditions are changing quickly or information is incomplete and stakes are so high?
Definitely not gonna lie, it's tough. Especially early on as you get into a new role, and certainly as the chief of CAL FIRE, when the buck stops with you, everybody above you are administration officials, the governor, et cetera. They're all looking to you to be their expert on solving this problem. And so there's a lot of weight. And then, of course, you're relying on all of your partners and your team, and at CAL FIRE now 15,000 people, and all of our partners to engage and deal with that. But oftentimes when these emergencies are emerging, and particularly looking back on the fire that burned Paradise in 2018, the Camp Fire, and the North Bay fires in Santa Rosa in the Bay Area in 2017, we had very little information as those fires were unfolding. Due to weather, smoke conditions, the Tubbs fire in Napa and Sonoma County was happening overnight. And so very difficult to get information and intel. So oftentimes you're operating, I won't say in the dark, but it wouldn't be the normal situation. And so you really have to rely, one, on your experience and understanding of what you assume is happening there, but also reach out and gather information to what you can. And then you just have to make the best decisions based on the information that is occurring and that you're getting at the time. It's really learning to lean forward. It's not about making decisions about what's happening right now. It's where do we anticipate this fire or this emergency being tomorrow and the next day? And those are the decisions you're making right now, because that's by the time those decisions are implemented and in place, that's where you'll be.
So I'm curious too on, because in folks who don't know that maybe listening, is AMU is really the aviation management unit, ground is. How much communication is there between the two? And is it, or is it typical to what we see in federal where we're like the right hand and the left hand don't know what they're doing some of the time?
Obviously, with any large organizations, you're always going to have those, communications
Sure.
challenges, and sometimes programs, may be in a little bit of a silo as they're operating. But I can honestly say that the culture at Cal Fire and in general the fire service, but certainly at Cal Fires, those programs are very implemented. There's an expectation that what's happening in the aviation program, the firefighters in the air, if you will, and all the folks supporting them are directly engaged with the firefighters on the ground and coordinating that effort. And that's the expectation. And after every emergency, there's an after action review internally to look at, okay, where could we have improved? Where were those breakdowns occurring, if they were, and how do we fix that, going forward? And it's a constant learning process every day throughout the year as we, again, emergencies become more complex, and we're
Right.
putting more aviation resources in the air and more firefighters on the ground and protecting more critical assets. All of that is just becoming more complicated and just really reinforces this need to push us all together in a coordinated way.
Absolutely. So in situations like that, I mean, in general, I think, but trust seems especially important in those types of situations we were just talking about. How do you build a team and culture where people can make good decisions under pressure without waiting for direction from the top?
No, that's a really good question. And the time to build that trust and teamwork is not while the emergency's happening. It's way too late.
Right.
You don't want to go into battle not understanding, knowing the people around you. For me, that was probably the most important part of my career, and certainly my 8 years as chief of Cal Fire. I early on realized I don't know everything. I can't possibly know everything. Our programs are complex. Our department's large. So you build, in our case, it was an executive team of a cross section of people from all of the different disciplines. And there are some of those folks I had worked with throughout my career. Others were, new to certainly me and to the organization. But you build that, you bring them in. And I always go back to the military, the ethos of the cockpit resource management, and going back to, when both in the civilian and defense industry, where, it used to be the pilot was in charge of the cockpit, and you didn't counter anything the pilot said, and he or she was in charge. Well, at the end of the day, we had plane crashes because of that, because the rest of the team wasn't empowered to talk about what they were seeing and to raise their hand and question what was happening. And I really took that to heart. I, again, can't know everything. I want to know different perspectives. I want, yes, fire protection professionals, that's the business, and they know that inside and out. But they can also oftentimes get tunneled in on a problem. And sometimes it takes another perspective from someone who isn't so closely associated with it, that does help provide some different perspective. And that's how we ran our executive leadership. Our executive team had everybody from the corporate structure, if you will, at the table, and they all got a voice, and we all talked it through. And again, we made the decisions, but really empowered them to be part of the team.
Yeah, and I think that you guys, Cal Fire does such a great job of this where, I mean, we've talked about it, and folks will know from the intro, but Ken is on our board here at LSI, and we will joke sometimes that even our folks, that we have 45 people out there, that sometimes I think if you asked them who they worked for, I don't know that they'd say LSI, they'd say Cal Fire, because the teams are so integrated.
Yeah.
But you guys treat your vendors as an extension of you, not like a managed third-party provider, right? So I have seen it firsthand, and that's only me being here 5 years, that they care about your opinion. They care about like bring all the ideas to the table. I mean, and I don't know. I commend that. I think that's
No,
awesome.
I truly believe that. And I really didn't see it as closely as I did until coming to the Sacramento to work in programs. I was the chief of fire protection and as well as a number of other programs while I was in working at headquarters prior to being the chief. And one of those programs was overseeing the aviation program, and really where I had an opportunity to get to know LSI and get to know the other vendors. And they're really partners, not vendors. And you were 100% right, Sarah, is that it's a team there. And you wouldn't, when you go to the aviation management unit, you can't necessarily tell the difference when you look at people who's a state employee and who's working for LSI or Amentum, because they're just blended in. And a really good example of how this played out is in 2014 on the Dog Rock fire in Yosemite, right behind me there. Tanker 81 was supporting the fire for assisting the National Park Service, and Tanker 81 tragically crashed into hit a tree and crashed into the side of the hill. And we didn't know that at the time. All we knew was we had an air tanker down, didn't know the cause. And we were put in a difficult position that evening of having to shut down all of the fixed wing aircraft until we could get to the bottom of what the problem was. And for probably 24 to 36 hours, the team at AMU, at the Aviation Management Unit, the mechanics, the logistics support at LSI, all of the folks didn't know if it was something that was within their program area that went wrong. And they took it so personally that
Sure.
we brought in the NTSB prior to the investigation even being close to being completed, but the NTSB investigator stood up in front of that entire team as one and said, "Can't tell you what caused it, but I can tell you what didn't, and it was none of you." But it was this philosophy that we were all in this together. It didn't matter who you were. We're a team, and they all take this so personally, their job. And I've never seen that anywhere else, particularly in a public-private partnership like this.
No, and I've heard you tell that story before, and it gives me chills, and I completely agree, because I think we had something similar to that a couple years ago, and yeah, I would say all of us glued to our phones or TVs, right, until to understand if someone was rescued from it, the plane going down, and then just thinking the whole time is like you said, was it one of our faults? Was it part of something we did, etc. So and that was like the one that they had come up under the belly of the other plane, right? So nothing ever makes it any better, but like you said, it's relief that they're like, okay, we didn't directly have this this fault in it in any way. So
I mean, you take it very personally because it really is did this testament of how personal and serious they take their role and responsibility. Every bolt, every piece, every wire on that aircraft, someone's touching or managing, and they take so much pride in that.
absolutely. Wildfire, I would say it's so even crazy right now. I have one Cam, our production manager that's in here, and us, we have one burning, I don't know, 20 minutes from us that's, over 100,000 acres right now and just out at 0% containment. But we even see it in Utah right now. And I've called you to, get help on some of the ones here that they don't want to partake of. So hopefully they're listening, and I don't know, sometimes we'll partake of it. But wildfires changed dramatically over the course of your career, for sure. Even in the last 5 years of me watching it, it's changed dramatically. When did you realize that you were dealing with something that was fundamentally different than the traditional fire season? And I even remember coming on and being told, oh, fire season's from April to October. And now I'm like, the hell, it's all year now, right? For California. So
Yeah. So I do get asked that question a lot. It's probably the most often asked question. And I literally go back to 2013 and why. It was the rim fire on the Stanislaus National Forest that summer that burned up into Yosemite National Park. And anything that comes close to, or near Yosemite National Park instantly becomes international news. So it got a lot of attention. But what was really about was that's when me personally and the team and the fire professional, we were really, this is a different fire. The way this fire is burning, the speed with which it burned up through the Tuolumne River drainage, the impact it had on threatening communities in Tuolumne County, the county seat of Sonora, Tuolumne City. And it was just the effort that went into having to put in huge contingency lines to protect that, and the evacuations, all that painted a picture that we're headed, this is a different kind of fire. We're headed into something that it just, instantly went to that pyrocumulus cloud, that basic cloud, smoke cloud that looks like a thunder storm. Well, that's literally what it is. And just the feel was very different. And subsequent every year following that, things continued to get more intense and worse. And but that was really the turning point. And there's a lot of challenges, and there's a whole period of time and things that were happening politically and financially, not only in California but in the country, that sort of shaped where we were when we got to that point. And we weren't necessarily ready to go for what was coming next.
What do you attribute that to, right? Is that droughts? Is that weather changing? Is that climate change? What do you see that as, that really it's, you saw it was like this epiphany in 2013, but even now today, seeing that the whole Western United States is on fire right now.
And I know this makes folks uneasy. And for me, it's not about the political piece of this all, or how we got here, any of that. At the end of the day, the conditions are changing. The climatic conditions are different. And we're seeing vegetative changes. Things are getting warmer. I was mentioning to you earlier, this July was on average for the entire country was the hottest July on record. We look at what's happening in Europe. I mean, there are wildfires burning across really
Europe's
the entire
crazy
globe,
right now.
right? Yes, the Northern Hemisphere right now is on fire. And but for much, they're all the same reason. We're looking at drought in England, and we're looking at, there are World War II ships now that were scuttled in Amsterdam and in Europe that we're seeing, that we haven't seen for 40 or 50 years. And so the things are different. And we're seeing drought. The picture behind me obviously is there because it looks nice, but it also paints a story. That this picture was taken in the middle of about 2015, 2016. And, if you look, there's a lot of dead trees. And what we were seeing is, average temperatures are going up. Our fire seasons are lengthening. That burn period, if you will, it's really, as we've talked about, almost year round. So all that's having impact on the kind of vegetation that is growing, making trees more susceptible to insect and disease. And in 2015 and 16, we had 150 million trees in the Sierra Nevada that were succumbing to bark beetle.
That kind of makes me want to jump into some of the things that you said. Is we hear a lot about wildfire resilience today. What does true wildfire preparedness and resilience actually look like before an emergency happens? And maybe like what you're saying in that picture behind you, which I love, by the way, is when they have something like infestations and you're calling it gas, that's like, if that's not taken care of, you're saying that's really like just putting gas on a fire, right? So I'm just curious, is what does that preparedness and wildfire look like today?
I call it using all the tools in the toolbox. It's not a one solution. It's really all, using all of the resources available to you. And I've always talked about it as sort of three sides to a triangle. You have to have this strong response piece. That response component is critical, because no matter what we're working on, we're not going to solve this wildfire problem and community resilience issue overnight. This is a long-term challenge. So we have to continue to provide, robust resources for, that initial attack and protecting communities and resources. But then we have to look at sort of the other two pieces. We have the forest health, forest management piece that we hear a lot about, and I think there are a lot of misnomers about what people think that it's the panacea to fix everything. And it's a huge part of the equation. I mean, the healthy managed forests provide clean water. They protect environmental habitat, all of those things that we need for healthy ecosystems. In California, 2/3 of the water comes from the Sierra Nevada mountains, that runoff. So if we don't have healthy forest watersheds that protect our water quality and the availability of that resource, it impacts society. So having that healthy forest piece is economically, having access to the resources that come, that's all critically important. And of course, when that forest is adjacent to a community, having well-managed forest that reduces fire intensity in and around that community is key. But what we're learning is really this other third side of this community wildfire preparedness, prevention, mitigation is key. The fires that burned in Southern California in 2025, that was not a forest management issue. That's not what it may have been perceived or couched as that. The Eaton fire, that burned in Southern California near Altadena, within probably 20 to 30 minutes, Sarah, that fire was not a wildland fire. That was an urban conflagration. And the issue is all about that community, itself, and all the things that we're learning about house to house ignition and ornamental vegetation, how homes are burning. And so really bringing it back to this discussion about resilient communities, it's combining all of this sort of together into a treatment plan. It starts, and this should surprise no one. I mean, it starts with the people that live there. It starts with the homeowner and the community member doing their part. It's hardening their home, and it's literally as simple as changing out vents to reduce the size of the opening so that embers don't get in. We're just learning a lot about how homes are burning in these situations, and it's the siding, it's windows, and so it's really hardening our homes. It's taking care of the defensible space to reduce the vegetation around the home. And then doing that strategically, identify where you can do that. And that's the amazing things that are available now that were not available when I started, is the technology, the ability to use, for example, artificial intelligence to run fire behavior modeling. We can run so many scenarios now on a community to look at how fire is going to impact a community under multiple conditions, different vegetation types, weather, all of that, and then really start prioritizing where to work in that community. The next thing you know, you've got a home, and now you've got an entire neighborhood and a community all doing their pieces, combining to be as one. And then it's those strategic sort of community level fuels treatments, the fuel breaks, the thinning that helps sort of protect the whole of the community, and then working your way out again to the broader forest treatments, help reduce overall fire intensity. But it all starts with the community, and that's folks really having to engage and needing to engage in their community.
Take some ownership.
Absolutely. Yeah. Fire safe councils, firewise communities, whatever that looks like. But that's the hardest piece, because as we know, 10% of the people or less do 90% of the work. And most people are just busy with their daily lives. They're going to soccer practice. They're doing whatever they need to do, getting their kids there. And no one wants to talk about or engage in this piece until a fire's happening, and then we're challenged.
Right. When you look at all the advances, and you mentioned AI a little bit, right, but you see the advances in aircraft, drones, AI, kind of the predictive stuff, that you talked about, or even mapping and data. What do you think will have the biggest impact on wildfire response over the next decade?
I think it's coming in the form of several pieces. We have made huge strides in resource tracking. We put in some CAL FIRE transition to automatic vehicle locating, during my tenure as chief, and now that's being taken to even higher levels with tablet command and some other pieces. So this ability to track resources real time is key. But I think it's the areas that we maybe wouldn't have thought 10, 20 years ago, if you'd have suggested that drones would be engaged in the wildland firefight itself, I think people would have, me included, would have just laughed the person out of the room. And now looking at how, I mean, we're seeing what's happening in the battle space, both in Europe and in the Middle East with drones just in this last several years. That's also coming to the wildland fire space. And it's certainly drones are being used to gather information over a fire. But this ability to deliver payload, to actually use drones to light back fires in strategic ways so that firefighters are inserted into difficult terrain and situations. And what's happening now through partnerships with Seneca and other drone manufacturers, they're actually developing initial attack drone capabilities that will carry a payload of water, 60 to 80 gallons of water, which sounds like absolutely nothing against a wall of fire. But it's the concept that all fires start as a spark. And with this combination of early detection, with new technologies, pre-deployment of these resources and quick detection, and launching these to where the fire gets attacked in that incipient stage, there's just that, again, it's something that I wouldn't have imagined even just a few years ago, but that's where things are going. And then I think it's how we're using, our resources very differently now is really changing the space on the fire ground.
Absolutely. And I think all those that you just mentioned, like the drones doing the reconnaissance, it's crazy to see. And even last month when we were out there, we had our team was showing the folks the Nighthawks simulator, which is like a dark chamber. I mean, you walk in and shut the door, you can't see anything. And we've got it hooked up, tethered so that it's on the one with the hoist and different stuff. It's so cool. But like you said, that capability has been amazing. Also getting bigger planes like the C-130s, right? I think there's so many advancements, and it's cool to see because on this side, like you mentioned, Europe and the Middle East, it's got a different connotation around it with the drones and what their purposes and they're doing, right? But over here, it's like taking the risk out of things that were risky, like flying at night but had better, odds at getting it put out, or, having the tracker go over and look to see where the fire, now we're sending unmanned. So I just think it's so cool with the advancements in it and taking the risk out of it when needed for, the humans that are working it. So.
Yeah, and as we know, this has been a difficult year for firefighters. We've had several aviation, accidents. We've had some burnovers, and anything that we can do to reduce the risk. We'll never take the risk out, but anything that we can do that helps reduce that are things we need to be working on wholeheartedly.
Absolutely, and I even think about it, like I walk in the door last night from work, and my 5-year-old's like, "Mom, did you see the fire? And did you see the helicopter?" I mean, like he's even in tune to it, right? The helicopter went down and I'm thinking like, yeah, if it, like you said, anything we could do that doesn't happen is phenomenal for sure. So looking back at your time leading CAL FIRE, what are you most proud of? Like, I asked that, like, what did teach you about public service, but like, what are you the most proud of throughout your time?
If you go back, you asked about when we saw things starting to change, and we go back to 2013, and we were literally, I was several years into being the chief of CAL FIRE at that point, and we were, several years into Governor Brown's administration, and the focus in those first few years was trying to rectify a $26 billion state budget deficit. The entire country was coming off of a recession. California was hit hard, particularly because of the tech industry in Silicon Valley, all of that. And we had the real estate mortgage crisis. All of these things just tanked our budget. And when Governor Brown took office, his focus was, hey, first and foremost, we're not going to be effective if we have a budget deficit. And so his first several years were focused on rectifying the budget. And that meant budget reductions for all of us. And I mean, we had to do our part along with every other organization. And so we were put into some difficult positions. We cut an air attack base. We reduced bulldozers. We cut warehouse. Everybody took cuts equally within the organization. But as you might imagine, it didn't set us up we were going the wrong direction when it came to the problem that was coming down the road. So, fast forward 2013, 2014, we really were every year where our fires were continuing to get worse. What was used to be a career or a season wildfire of 10 or 20,000 acres was becoming the norm. We were already behind the power curve into how we were going to respond to this. And so this took all of us rolling up our sleeves to figure out, how do we set ourselves up for the future? And again, as I mentioned earlier, you have to be aiming for the problem 2 years down the road, not today, because 2 years down the road, this problem is going to be much worse than it is today. And so what I'm really proud of is that how this group, this team of people, how we worked under extremely difficult conditions to bring the department forward and lay a foundation for where they're at today. And in 2013, we didn't have the resources that we have today from aviation. And you just look at the advancements that have happened over the last 10 to 12 years, really position the organization,
For sure.
to be where it's at.
For sure. Absolutely. Ken, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your perspective and chatting about fires, also lessons that you've learned. So I just want to say I think you've had a incredible career in public service, and we love that we get you now on the LSI board. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. This has been awesome. Appreciated this and love working with you all at LSI. Just a great opportunity.